Hey guys, so we're going to continue talking about linear equations, except we're going to be introducing a new form. Before I get into that form, I want to remind you of our slope-intercept form, all right? And remember, there was two things that we were always looking for, whether it was a graph or a table. We always needed slope, which was represented by m in the equation, and y-intercept, which is represented by b. And that's the reason it's called slope-intercept form. You always need the slope and the y-intercept to write the equation. So now I want to introduce to you point-slope form, okay? And, crazy, the two things that you need in order to write an equation in point-slope form are a point and a slope. That's it. So, I'm going to write down the equation real quick. It's going to be y minus y1 equals m times the quantity of x minus x1. Okay? These are all things we've seen before, but not necessarily in this order. So, let's identify some things real quick. y1 and x1, okay, those are going to be what's replaced with the point. Okay, so if you remember, when we're finding slope from 2 points, we do that y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 equation. It's basically the same thing, except we're just using 1 point here. All right, x1, y1. So this comes together for your point. x1, comma, y1. Alright? Now, let's look at some of the other parts. We have m. Now, we're used to m, right? This still represents slope. Alright? That doesn't change. Alright? The other thing that doesn't change is the fact that y and x, without the identifiers, without the little 1 subscript, those don't change. So just like when we were writing equations in slope-intercept form, we leave the y and the x alone. We're just putting in the slope and the y-intercept. Now we're putting in a point and a slope. So if you were given the point 5, 3 and the slope of, let's say, -4, then all you have to do is plug this into the equation. All right, we've got y minus y1, which is going to be the y value of our point. This is y1. So we're going to say y minus 3 equals m, the slope, which we know is -4, times the quantity of x, which remember doesn't change, minus x1, which is again coming from our point, which is 5. And that's it. That is the equation of the line that goes through the point 5, 3 and has a slope of -4. Got it here in point-slope form. Let me show you another way that we can come to an equation like this. Alright, so now let's look at an example when we're given 2 points. Instead of given a point and a slope right off the bat just to plug in, we're going to have 2 points here. Alright, now just like I said a second ago, the two things we need in order to write a linear equation in this form is a point to fill in for x1 and y1 and a slope to fill in for m. Alright? Now, we've got 2 points here, so we don't need to worry about finding a point, but we need to find slope. How do we find slope given a couple of points? It's just the same as we normally done. We use that y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I'm going to go ahead and label this x1 and y1, and I'm label this x2 and y2. Now I'm going to use that formula from the formula sheet, the yellow sheet that you can use on your algebra EOC. We've got y2, which is negative 6, minus y1, which is 1, over x2, which is 2, minus x1, which is negative 5. Okay? Negative 6 minus 1 gives us a negative 7 up top. And 2 minus a negative 5 gives us a positive 7 on the bottom, which simplifies to negative 1. Okay? So now we know that m, our slope, is going to be negative 1. So we've got a point, we've actually got 2 points, and we've got a slope. Let's write our equation. I'm going to come over here. We got y minus y1, and I'm just going to use the same x1 and y1 that I used for this part of it. So we've got y minus y1, which is 1, equals m, which we found to be negative 1. So you can put a negative 1, or you could just put a negative sign. Either way, it means the same thing, times the quantity of x. Now we've got minus x1, okay, and this is something important that you'll find in a lot of problems. It's going to be x minus x1, but x1 is a negative 5, and we know minusing by a negative is just going to change it to a positive, so we can just write plus 5 in here, okay? It's very important. There we have it. All right, we've written the equation of the line that goes through these 2 points, and this is a perfectly acceptable answer, but you could potentially go a different route and get a correct answer as well. So we're going to use this point now to write the equation. So let's give that a shot, and I'm going to use a different color. Okay, so same thing here. We've got y minus, and instead of y1, we're going to use y2 this time, because all it is a point, all right? And it's minus negative 6, which this is going to be plus 6, right? And then the slope hasn't changed, so this is still just going to be a negative 1 on the outside. And then that's times the quantity of x minus, and we're using this point, so we're going to use 2 as our x value. That is the same equation, just using a different point to set it up. So this equation still goes through both of these points. So what we're going to do now is try to use point-slope form to make a prediction. So I was thinking about it, and I've watched a lot of Disney movies in my time, but I'd love to know about how many I'll have watched by a certain age based on kind of how I've progressed throughout my life, at least. So I've got some ages here from when I was 6 and 14, and then when I will be 25, all right? And when I was 6 years old, there are about 10 Disney movies that I specifically remember. I've probably seen more, but nonetheless, these are the ones I remember. I've got about 10, and then around 14, I'd probably seen like 22-ish. So I'd love to know approximately how many I will probably have seen by the time I'm 25. So what we've got here is a table of x and y values, essentially. And so now all we got to do is figure out our 2 things. So we need a point, which I think we've actually got 2 points here, so that's done. And then we need to figure out our slope. Now we've talked about a couple different strategies for that. You could either pull these 2 points and write it as 6, 10, and then 14, 22, right? And then you've got an x1, y1, and x2, y2, and you can do the y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So we've got 22 minus 10 over 14 minus 6. So we've got 22 minus 10 is 12, 14 minus 6 is 8. And 12 over 8 can obviously be simplified to 3 over 2. I may or may not have made a small mistake there. No worries though. Okay, 3 over 2 is going to be our slope, our m. Alright? Now the other way I was going to say is we could also do change in y over change in x. So you've got from 10 to 22, you're going to add 12. Alright, and then from 6 to 14, you're going to add 8. Yep, add 8. So the change in y over the change in x would be 12 over 8, and we could do the same 3 over 2 here. Okay, so we've got a slope, and we've got some points here to work with. We can now write an equation to start plugging things into. So we've got y minus y1, which I'm going to use 610 since that was what I used over here. So y1 would be 10 equals m, which we figured out to be 3/2. So we're going to do 3/2 times the quantity of x minus x1, which is going to be 6. Now we have an equation we can work with to figure out how many Disney movies I might watch by the time I'm 25. So let's get a different color and let's plug in 25 in this equation and figure out what our y value is going to be. So I'm going to plug this in now. That should only replace the x value. So we've got 3 over 2 times, we've got 25 here minus 6. So 25 minus 6 is going to be 19. And then 19 times 3 over 2 is going to give us 57 over 2. So I'm going to go ahead and write y minus 10 is 57 over 2. Alright, and then to get y by itself, I'm going to have to add 10 to both sides. So y equals 57 over 2 plus 10 is going to be 77 halves. Okay. So if we approximate that, it's going to be 38.5 Disney movies watched. Now, hopefully, I'll finish the other half of that Disney movie and get to 39. But this is how, from a table of values, you can predict the y value from a given x value using point slope form. Alright, so there should be a few practice problems at the bottom of your notes page, very similar to the ones we talked about in the video. So make sure you take care of those, and then we'll talk about them at Math Workshop. Thank you guys for watching.